Hello and welcome to REO Digital's Snackable Series on GA4 and the sunsetting of universal analytics. This is session 1 of 3. Today we're going to talk a little bit about why Google are making this change and what the changes you can expect to see if you upgrade to GA4 and why you should consider doing it sooner rather than later. A little bit about myself before we start. My name is Finbar Deane-Stott. I am REO Digital's data analytics consultant, and just for my bona fides, I've been working in agency work, doing implementations for a little over 10 years now for all manner of different industries, from charities to government bodies to insurance clients. And a lot of that has been setting up and making Google Analytics work for those different kinds of people. With that being said, let's talk a little bit about GA4, or more specifically, a little bit about the big number hanging over the top of us. So, GA4 will be sunset for standard users on July the 1st, 2023, which means between the day you are watching this and then, there are 199 days. But that's calendar days. So let me make that number even smaller. When we subtract out all the weekends and bank holidays and other holidays, you are looking at 136 working days. In 136 working days, everyone will be moved over onto GA4, provided you are a standard user, whether they like it or not. If you are a GA360 user, you have about an extra year to get things sorted, but even then, your implementation is probably larger, so you should also get started anyway. So, what happens 136 working days from now? To answer that, let's first look a little bit about how Google Analytics fits into your ecosystem. So the way that Google Analytics fits into your ecosystem is functionally in the middle of everything. You will have your website or your app on which you will place the Google Analytics tag, and it will gather data about what users do while they are there, what pages they look at, whether they purchase things, what products they're adding to cart and buying, so on and forth. But it also pulls together data from all your different other efforts. So your marketing platforms like Google Ads and your email centers will have product links of varying levels of complexity, whether they be Google's own made ones that will brought over cost data from how much you've spent on different advertisements to email campaign names or display ad sizes. And all of that information is ported into Google so you can understand what campaigns drove people to the site and connect that up with their later behavior. See how well they performed when they landed and whether they went on to buy things. Similarly, you may run a CRO program, Optimize or Optimizely, running experiments which you rely on Google Analytics to pair up with, so you can split your data by whether this is audience 1 or audience 2, the people who see the control of the variant, and look at the different ways they behave after they have seen whatever you've changed in your experimentation. Again, and then similarly to the way that we would split by an experiment, we also have our qualitative analytics tools, things like a Hotjar or a Content Square, where we can grab session IDs for the different recordings. That way you can use Google Analytics to hone in on people who encounter a certain error that you believe is an issue, pull out the IDs for those sessions in a Hotjar, look at those screen recordings specifically, start to get an idea of how users behave once they encounter a certain error. In the reverse, if you find a session replaying Hotjar that you think is interesting, you can take its ID, find those sessions in GA, and build segments that will let you identify the similar behavior points that they used. And that's all the data we put into Google Analytics. At a certain point, we take data back out again. First of all, into custom reports, dashboards, using things like Looker Studio, previously known as Data Studio, or Tableau and Power BI. We can start to make visualizations of this data, organize it for specific teams who maybe are not as Google Analytics savvy. And we may even put it through more advanced analysis techniques, like using BigQuery, which is Google's cloud computing tool that lets us kind of transform and mesh different data sets together, which can then also be ported over to other Google products like Looker Studio. So all of this data flowing in and out, the purpose of Google Analytics is to sit in the middle and be the place all your data gets combined and then flow out to other spots where it can be visualized in useful and pleasant to look at ways, as we'll talk about later on. So briefly, what is going to be either extremely difficult to impossible to do without Google Analytics? First of all, any amount of page analytics you have on your key funnels, whether that be working through a shopping checkout page or a request a quote form or something a little more esoteric based on your needs, our ability to report on that is going to go away. Your ability to measure the success of your different marketing campaigns, where users land, what pages they see, how much they bounce, how much they go on to look at other content, etc. We're going to lose that. While we will still be able to see when people open an email and click through, we'll have no way to understand once they're on the site, what do they do. Your actual, just the performance of your website, both at a top level of how many people came through, what pages they bounced off of, what pages they found engaging, whether or not they clicked key call to action buttons, etc. All that event tracking will go away. The ability to kind of analyze different site sections, so to understand whether the add to cart button is placed properly, whether the different cross-sell and upsell features are being used. We're going to lose the oversight on that. Or indeed less directly conversion driving sections like a blog section. Your ability to know how far people are scrolling through the content, whether they're actually reading things or they're just opening it, reading the title and going, this isn't for me actually. We're going to lose that. And then a certain level of just your ability to see what products people are buying. All of that's going to become limited to reports out of your backend, which are a lot harder to pull out, a lot less people will have access to in general than a very quick to look at and understand analytics report. With all that being said, with all the things that are being put at risk with this upgrade and sunset, why are Google doing it? What was wrong with Universal Analytics that requires this next step, or indeed what is being improved? So there are two things that Google is seeking to solve for with GA4, or indeed two issues they want to address from Universal Analytics, I suppose, to be more accurate. First of all is the data model. Universal Analytics was built to track websites. Whether they were used on a desktop or phone is largely irrelevant to this, but specifically on a browser looking at a website. Shortly after they finished working and launched Universal Analytics to the public, Google then bought a company called Firebase, who make app tracking analytics, which is obviously positive in that Google now is able to track all kinds of interactions across a customer's digital ecosystem. But the issue is these two tools were built separately, and the fundamental data model is different. And while it can be reconciled, it takes a lot of extra time, effort, and energy in the background to join those two things together. The other major problem that Google wants to solve is that of privacy issues. Universal Analytics has had some recent losses in European courts around the ways it stores and processes data. Google have been fined for several of these, and there's even a few European court cases where they're looking to kind of push on from this and ban the usage of UA in their borders. This is mostly due to the ways that Google stores IP addresses as part of their processing rules, and also kind of the location that they store their data, the physical places where the servers are kept. On top of this, Google Analytics is entirely reliant on cookies for its tracking. That is the fundamental way we recognize a user and how they come back to the site and what they do during that. And over the last few years, both users have gotten more conscious of when they're accepting cookies, and also browsers themselves are getting more active in their filtering and removal of cookies, most notably Safari with Intelligent Tracking Prevention, or ITP, that you may have heard of, which has moved on to severely limit what are called first-party cookies, which is what Google Analytics relies upon. If you used returning users as an important metric in Google Analytics, you may have noticed that has become less reliable over the recent years because of this. So how does Google solve these problems? First of all, in the data model, the way that tracking works independent of device is now the same. Everything in GA4 is sent as an event, whether it is on a desktop or on an app device. This means that we can very easily combine data streams from these two different places together into one cohesive data set. So it's very easy to look at your total visitors, how many transactions you've had across your whole ecosystem, etc. But they are tagged as whether this is web or whether this is app, so it's also extremely easy to separate them out and look at each environment separately and make sure that everything is working correctly. On the privacy issue, many of these concerns have been addressed by GA4. I think what IP anonymization has been adopted by default, which renders some of the IP address complaints null and void. There has been a big reduction in the amount of time that data is stored in the servers, which helps with data retention issues and making sure that we're only keeping data for the appropriate times that we actually need it for, as opposed to just hanging onto it for an indefinite period of time. There's been upgrades to the way that the platform handles subject access requests, making it much easier to identify individual users and remove their data, which satisfies a lot of requirements that GDPR and other similar policies have worldwide. And they've also added extra tools like server-side tracking that allows us a tighter control over exactly how we process data and what data we send on to Google. Let's make sure that we're not sending any personal information or other things that would be in breach of either Google's terms of service or wider privacy laws around that. In regards to how Google have addressed things like the over-reliance on cookies to track things, they've kind of attacked this from a few different angles. First of all, they've tried to pull back to a much more user-level focus and really widened the scope of tools like Google Signals and user IDs. Google Signals are all about identifying a user based on them being logged into a Chrome browser or similar across different devices. User IDs are more of a collaboration between Google Analytics and your own systems, generated when somebody makes an account and then surfaced every time they do something while logged in. So we can identify the same person across every device they use based on that ID as opposed to a cookie that we've placed there. And they've even sought to address how we understand how many users are just not opting in to be tracked at all with a feature called consent mode, which captures a limited amount of information about users who do not consent to be tracked and then attempts to sort of understand that data set without a lot of its contextual information by looking at the data set of those who do consent and using that to statistically model this group. We'll talk more about that in session 3. Those are the reasons why we're moving away from universal analytics, but let's talk a little bit about what does GA4 do that's new and interesting. This is an upgrade apparently. What new tools do we have? And there are actually some upgrades. There's some reasons pulling you towards GA4 as opposed to just pushing you away from UA. First of all, there's been a pivot in the focus of how reporting works in Google Analytics. We're moving further away from kind of the standard reports that you may be used to empowering your end users to get more creative and interrogate the data more deeply just in the interface. So they changed the custom reporting tools to what is called the exploration tool, which has a lot more features in it than the previous custom reporting one does, both improving on the ways that you can create tables and funnels and so on, giving you more options, more steps, more levers that you can access, but also new tools like the segment overlap, which lets you pull out different audiences and segments from your website data and see how they intersect with one another. On top of that, we also have Google leaning more into their machine learning resources and giving us access to them in the interface. We have predictive metrics that can sort of forecast conversions for us. So we can see how many more sales we might make this month based on current performance and whether or not we're doing better than that. As well as predictive audiences that can even find people who look like they will end up in key marketing audiences you may have so that you can build pipelines to get those people through the customer journey faster. We also have more marketing tools available to us in GA4 that previously were only available to paid and premium 360 GA customers. So a data-driven attribution model is available by default for all users. It's built into the main platform so that we are better able to properly measure the performance of all your different marketing efforts, as opposed to last touch attribution, which kind of has been the standard across most marketing tools for a long time, and generally over credits upper funnel marketing efforts like paid search and organic search. On top of that improvement in marketing analytics in the platform, we also have an improved way of getting marketing data both into GA and back out again. The product links with other tools in the GMP like Google Ads and so on have been improved, and the audiences that you can create and share out to other platforms have similarly can now take advantage of these other predictive metrics and so on. And lastly, speaking of improved product links, Google have also added a product link for BigQuery to even standard GA, which was previously only available to GA360, which means that standard GA accounts now have access to kind of the exports and all the advanced tools that BigQuery lets us do, and the analysis that that can enable. Okay, so now that we've discussed all the reasons why the move is happening and all the features that can be we can take advantage of in GA4, let's talk a little bit about kind of how we get from what's going to happen between now and the sunset date for Universal Analytics and the important dates along the way. So between the moment you're watching this, first major point is if there is not a GA4 enabled to some level by January of 2023, then it will be impossible in January of 2024 to pull one calendar year's worth of reporting all from the same source of truth, all with the exact same data setup. We need to get GA4 in and going as soon as possible if we want for us to be able to do historical reporting for as far back as we might want to. The next important big date is the 1st of July 2023, which is when Universal Analytics for standard users will stop processing new data. As you can see on my timeline, 360 users will get to the 1st of July 2024 before theirs will stop collecting. This recently got pushed back. Our next key date for our standard users happens on the 1st of August 2023, which is when monthly reports will start being due using only GA4 data. There will be no backups available from Universal Analytics, no kind of old trusted and old reliable sources. On the 1st of August 2023 is when the data needs to already be good. People need to know what they're doing, otherwise you're going to have a solid week of everyone panicking, of broken data, of gaps in your analysis, and generally a lot of stress and upsetting times. For that reason, it's very important that we aren't running right up to the deadline and dropping all our analysts in it in that last moment. There's one more date I want to discuss, though our exact dates for are a little more vague, as Google haven't given us all the information. But they have said that all data will be available in the Universal Analytics interface for at least 6 months after UA is switched off. That is as specific as they gave us, but the most conservative way we should, to interpret that, and the way I believe we should probably follow it, is by January of 2024, if you are a standard Universal Analytics user, is when you will lose access to your data. Not just that it will no longer be processing new data, but that all the data you previously had is going to be blocked off and lost. So this is where we should start to look at either exports, creating extra custom reporting or what have you, but we need to be well in the clear of having our important data covered before that, because we're going to not be able to access it anymore. So with that timeline established, with our important dates of the 1st of July and January 2024 established in our minds as when we're going to start losing data in a big way, why should we be getting ready not just so that we make it in the nick of time for July 2023, but that we are ready well in advance of that date? So, as mentioned, first of all, reporting throughout 2023, ideally you want all of your data that's going to be pulled in one report together to be pulled from the same source. If you want to do a calendar year for 2023, that tracking needs to be running all the way throughout. We want to get that set up as soon as possible, so as little of it as possible has to be pulled from previous data sets or merged together from different places. Our second point is, if we run right up to the deadline, we don't leave ourselves any time to troubleshoot or QA. In a big migration like this, there are going to be things that are going to work a little differently, that we're going to need to take some time to make sure are accurately pulling through. We're going to need to leave ourselves time to make sure that any new tracking that gets added works exactly the way we intend it. And we don't want to be doing all that work at the same time as we have to use it to report on the rest of the business. We want to have all that QA done before it becomes the only thing we can use, because we will not have a backup after July. Whereas even if we're trying to use GA4 in advance, if something breaks, we still have the old reliable Universal Analytics data sets underneath to catch us as a safety net. So we need to get all this part of it done while we still have that safety net available. On a more end user focused front, running right up to the deadline leaves no time for your team to kind of get used to the new data set, used to the new metrics, to GA4's different way of visualizing information. What would be useful is to give them a little bit of time beforehand to start making reports and pulling things together before it becomes the only way they can do that. Otherwise, you're going to get urgent requests coming in that it's going to be much harder to hit at the normal timelines, because everything is slowed down that little bit by new methods of storing things, new methods of naming things, and the different ways that the data is organized, making everything just that little bit more frustrating for all involved. And lastly, and this is quite an important one, many of you will have dashboards, custom reporting, etc., built off the back of your Universal Analytics data. Sort of teams will need to know analytics results. For instance, you may have a marketing team who wants to look at the different ways that certain campaigns are performing, but they only look at it in that particular respect, and they're not going into the interface themselves. They're looking at an end report that you've constructed that pulls data out of Universal Analytics and organizes it for them. That data, all those dashboards will obviously break once the data stops collecting. So not only do you need to set up a GA, you need to recreate or update all of these downstream reports to use the new data set, and indeed possibly adjust them around things that have changed between the two platforms. And that means that we need that much extra gap between the GA4 being ready to go and having data in it and the sunset date. And that brings us to the end of this first session. We'll do some questions in a moment, but I hope that's made it clear about why the move is happening and why we should get moving on the upgrade as soon as we possibly can. We will now be taking questions.